Yeah, I'm recording. All right. Hi, folks. This is Richard Avery with Titanium Computing, the element needed to keep your business running. Continuing our interview series, today I've got Danny Jenkins from ThreatLocker. He's been the CEO of ThreatLocker since 2015, a accomplished CEO, CTO for well over a decade, and a cybersecurity expert and red team penetration testing professional as well. Danny, I really appreciate you taking the time for this interview.
Thank you for having me here today, Richard.
It's great to have you. So let me switch my view here so I get the gallery. Um, so uh, ThreatLocker is a whitelist application security service tool. And full disclosure, we use it here at Titanium Computing to secure our customers. Sometimes we even put it on our customers without them knowing, just so that we have the additional, I want to sleep well at night, knowing that my customers are safe, that I don't have to deal with being in the news. And ThreatLocker is one of the products that I use to do that. Uh, Danny, can you tell us a little bit about ThreatLocker and why it's a real game changer in the cybersecurity space?
My background's in enterprise security as well, and the enterprises tend to take security in a different approach. Like if you look at a lot of small businesses and MSPs, they tend to focus a lot on detection. So they'll say, I want to detect everything that's going wrong in my system and try and stop it based on that. But security really has three angles to it. There's a human layer, and I like to think of security as a triangle. So if I sent malware to 50 people, there's only there's three ways you can stop that threat. One is the human doesn't open it, which is very, very difficult to control, especially if you've got 20, 30, 50, 100 employees. Someone's going to do something stupid. The other way is you can detect it. And the third way is controls. In the enterprise space, we tend to address security with controls first, and then the others get piled on top. And there's a few controls that like our flagship control was our application whitelisting, which means if a piece of code, if a program isn't on a whitelist, it's not allowed to execute, whether it's a script, a DLL, or an executable. Now, in the enterprise space, that was always incredibly complicated. You had teams of people to manage this, and it was fine when you first deployed it, but then you had to deal with updates and Windows updates and Office updates and Chrome updates and Adobe updates. So what we needed to do was make it viable, not just to smaller businesses, to MSPs, but also for endpoints, because that's where most breaches happen today. So we have this default deny solution so we can control exactly what can run, but we track all of the updates so you don't have to worry about doing that. And we really reduce the overhead, the onboarding, and the management. The other cool things about what we do is it's all in the control area. It's about, look, not every application can be blocked. There's good applications that you need to run, but more and more often is attackers are weaponizing those like PowerShell or Redshift or RunDLL. So we want to be able to ring fence applications so that we can control exactly what they can do once they're running. So if they do have a 0-day vulnerability, the amount of damage they can do is limited. And we really expand on those controls throughout our entire suite, whether it's administrative permissions or storage or application access, things like that. But the goal is here, don't let anything run that isn't trusted. People don't generally change their programs every day anyway. Control what is running and control access to your storage, your administrative permissions. And these are the most effective ways to stop things like ransomware.
That's a great answer, Danny. And one of the things that as a penetration tester we learn is you can't necessarily bring your own tools to the game. You got to do something called living off the land, right? What PowerShell, what version of PowerShell, what scripts do they already have in the environment? Windows can do all sorts of detection. There's all sorts of functionality. And how to use that. And attackers do exactly that. So they'll do everything that you described, getting into a machine without having to grab their specialty toolkit. Uh, and you mentioned breaches. So while we're filming this, the RockU 2021 breach just came out. We've had the Colonial pipeline just in recent history. We had 20% of United States beef supply got ransomware. What a ridiculous. I swear to you, if they come after coffee or bacon, I'm going to war. Right? That's too much.
Well, it's beer next. I mean, we've got oil, we've got beef. Beer's got to be next.
Beer. Oh man. Which is
Yeah.
bacon, coffee, beer, which I got to draw the line somewhere.
So yeah, well, they're destroying the American dream here with beef burgers. I'm telling you, like it's a the thing is about these companies actually is they all have something in common, and that is if you come from a technology company, you're used to being targeted. If you're Bank of America, you're used to being targeted. When you think about companies like Colonial, and I don't know how their internal IT operations work, but we think about oil companies, we think about food manufacturing companies in general, even hospitals and doctors. These tend to be made up of boards of directors that are not technically savvy, who one day were in the fields drilling oil, or a farmer, and they've grown massively. So they tend not to think about technology as a requirement. So it's very easy to target them because they have the money, but they don't have the protection that the big banks would have.
Optive's landscape of cyber threat stated that 40% of all cyber attacks were directed at construction companies, which just highlights exactly what you're talking about. You know, these people that were putting up drywall, they were pouring concrete, they learned how to build a building, and then they eventually turned it into a business. And those are people that are usually the most affected because they don't have good infrastructure. Speaking of infrastructure, and we were talking about breaches, what's your take on the SolarWinds hack?
So, I mean, and this is unusual because normally when we're thinking about breaches, we're thinking about, is there a vulnerability in an application, or did someone run something on a machine? In the case of SolarWinds, it was a backdoor. It wasn't an intentional backdoor by SolarWinds, but essentially they got into their code and they planted a backdoor into the system that allowed attackers to get in. And this is a good example of the weaponization of existing tools against you. And as a company, of course, you're using SolarWinds. We have clients that use SolarWinds Orion, and it was on their whitelist. They downloaded it. It was on their whitelist. Now, by using whitelisting, they were able to stop it. But SolarWinds, in that case, what it did is it literally reached out to the internet to get instruction. And then it was able to go off, and that instruction could be creating scheduled tasks, installing programs. It could be actually eating your data there and there. It could just go off and get that instruction, and there's nothing you could do because it wasn't changing their code at that point. You'd already approved that code. Now, what you can do, and this is where you have to think about security differently, is if you take an application like SolarWinds and you think about what does it need to do, it actually needs to do a lot. It needs access to a lot. But what it didn't need access to was any other website on the internet except SolarWinds. So if you build controls, if you ring fence that application, you say, I'm going to make sure that the applications I'm running can only talk to what they need to talk to. In that case, we're able to stop that instruction going out, and that attack happening. And likewise, does it need to access does PowerShell need to access all your network shares? I have this rubber ducky here, plug it into your computer, and it literally copies all of your files from all of your network drives up to the internet. But the truth is, PowerShell doesn't need to do that. So in these cases, this is where you start getting into whitelisting is not enough, antivirus isn't enough, EDR isn't even enough because it's too late. You've got to make sure that you control those applications you run, because in the case of SolarWinds, I mean, it was a disaster in that, and it was a failure on SolarWinds' part. And I'm sure that they're making sure that doesn't happen again. But someone actually injected it in there. So as a company, there's nothing you could have done to stop that code being running on your machine other than not using SolarWinds. And the same thing could happen to any vendor. So your controls were limited to how do I limit damage in this environment.
That's some great information. And SolarWinds wasn't the first one. There was a CC Cleaner got hit a couple years ago. Their command and control infrastructure got hacked and malware was injected. There was an ASUS, I think, got their infrastructure. Their driver update packages got infected, and they were pushing malware that way. And now we've got a Dell sound card driver that's been in the wild for 12 years. That if you just ask it nicely for level 0 permissions, it grants it. So having this additional layer of protection is really critical, and it can also be a sales tool. So literally yesterday, I went out and interacted with a realty company, and their IT company, they just constant conflict, because they want to have all of these emails, right? A home buyer is saying, they're emailing from Gmail or Yahoo or AOL or wherever they're emailing from, and those need to be available, but people put restrictions on lots of email filters because that's where phishing comes in. So this company wants to have their email filters wide open, getting everything that they possibly can, because they've legitimately managed to track that they've lost over $50,000 in sales from closed houses. Here in Austin, the housing market is just on a complete tear. I know people who have lost home bids, even though they bid $100,000 over asking price. So you can imagine a realtor being really upset that certain bids aren't going through or certain contracts aren't going through. And part of our recommendation then was, yeah, sure, we can open that email filter wide up for you. We're just going to lock the endpoints down so that you can only run 4 or 5 programs. And part of that suite was using ThreatLocker to say, hey, there can be malware in the email. There can be something wrong in the PDF. It's not going to get to run because we're going to ring fence the PDF program. We're going to isolate what websites you can talk to. And we're going to make what malware does exist or viruses do exist, they won't be able to run because ThreatLocker is going to be on the machine. So,
well, and that's really important. It's having, putting controls isn't about making your life hell. It's about reducing your surface area of attack and doing those things. So you can do more in theory. It's not about, I mean, you don't need to run any new program. I mean, most realtors aren't running anything but Office, Chrome, maybe some realty software. So you don't need to run anything outside of that anyway. So when you open that Word document and it has a piece of malware, it goes out to the internet and downloads malware. That doesn't happen. And making sure you put those things into place. Obviously, you still have to be very cognitive of spear phishing and sending bank details on and things like that.
Yeah, that's a common attack. Also, is the wire transfer fraud that exists in the realty space.
Well, you know what's a terrifying malware on that? Not so much the realty space. Have you seen this QuickBooks malware? So there's a piece of malware that goes around, and most people don't even know they had it. And we saw a huge uptick in it because one of our services is we'll take approval requests on behalf of our MSPs, normally during an onboarding process to make it smoother, or even long-term if they're a smaller MSP. And we suddenly started getting a lot of different approval requests, and we started looking at the software. What is it? And it's a program that when it runs, it looks at your registry, checks out your QuickBooks key, your last open QuickBooks file, collects that file, and then uploads it straight to the internet, and then deletes itself. Doesn't encrypt your files, doesn't do any damage, doesn't give you pop-ups. You don't know it ever ran on your machine. And it's terrifying because what it's actually doing is taking your QuickBooks database, and then they use that to launch spear phishing campaigns against you and your partners, because they now have all of those invoices, the exact amounts, the dates they go out. So it's very reasonable to send an email saying, hey, we updated our bank details. Can you pay this invoice with this amount to this bank? And they'll say, yeah, sure. I expect this email from you every single month.
That's a great example. No, I had not heard of that. And that's a great example about if somebody knows what you've got and they're coming for you. You know, I talk about people here in the Austin area and contractors going after chiropractors, right? If I craft an email that says, hey, I was in an accident on I-35 last weekend, the chiropractic office is going to immediately, geographic, like that's my I-35. But I-35 stretches from Texas to Minnesota. It cuts America in half. It's a huge expanse. So if I Google search every chiropractor within 20 miles of I-35, I can probably rack up about 10,000 chiropractors. So I craft that email. I put in the effective, that, you know, the targeted fish. Hey, I saw my general practitioner. They said I should have chiropractic adjustment. Do you have a therapist on staff? Attached is my MRIs and X-rays. Do you have, do you take insurance? Yeah, you ask all the questions that a patient is going to ask, and they're going to just read this email and be like, this is a perfect patient. This is exactly the kind of email I want to see. They're going to open that PDF in seconds.
Yeah.
And the same thing with there, like you're bringing information to the table that nobody should know. Nobody should know that you paid me last week $10,522 on the 5th. Right, having that extra validation step, just like what highway you're next to, takes all of the cybersecurity that gets crammed into the normal end user's head and just goes right out the window. Oh yeah, this has to be legit. So that is terrifying. That QuickBooks target, just using that for more intelligence data on attacking.
Yeah, and then it's even follows up with ransomware attacks, because they can now come in and they know who, and not just. They can go after your partners and send them emails, and they're more likely to trust you. Click on that invoice. So you see more ransomware, you see other types of attacks as well.
Where what do you think the difference between, and I get this question, this statement back when I'm talking to customers all the time. Who's your cybersecurity person? They're like, oh, we've got an IT guy, or we've got an IT or MSPA or IT company B, or they don't typically have a cybersecurity guy on staff. They certainly don't have somebody who should be at Apple or Amazon or eBay, or somebody with a really high skill set. What do you think the misconceptions between IT and cybersecurity are in the landscape today?
So, and even inside the cybersecurity market, this breaks down a lot in that you have different types of people who do different functions. But typically, I mean, IT's job is to make your computers run. That's their entire job. So, they have a lot of friends, and everyone likes them, and they're there. They'll say, "What can I do to make your computer easier to run? What can I do to make your life easier?" Security's job is to make sure nothing happens to your computer, your data doesn't get stolen. They tend not to be as personal and nice, and they tend to be very much more down to the point of, this is what's going to happen if you get struck. Now, there can be IT people who are really good at security. The challenge you have is, if you're an MSP, making sure you separate those roles, and you say, look, at the end of the day, everything has to be approved by the security guy. Any changes, the reviews, and everything else that the IT guy does. The IT guy normally is going to put the infrastructure in place. They're going to build out the infrastructure. They're not going to be thinking about the 100 different ways someone can get in. They're not going to be thinking about how people can move around. They're going to be thinking about, oh, you need to connect 20 computers together. How do you do that? And they're going to put the parts in place to do that. The security guy is going to come in and say, you need to connect 20 computers together. What happens when one of them gets malware? So he's going to ask every single question. They're very different roles. I mean, they're very similar skill sets, and skill sets cross over a lot, but they're very different roles and very different focuses. If your job's to be a bouncer at a bar, your job is to stop people coming in who are suspicious. And you can probably go in and pour drinks too, but that's not your job. Same in the IT world. It's making sure you know exactly that you have a security person who knows the security market, whose security people should be paranoid. And that's what keeps you safe. If they're not keeping you safe. And frankly, I almost feel as a business, if your security guy doesn't annoy you once in a while, he's not doing his job, because that's what their job should be. It should be to put speed bumps in the road, to put traffic lights, to make things stop, review, check, and move forward again. But ultimately save your business at the end of the day.
That's a great statement. And one of the things that I talk about with my customers is say, hey, it's my job to, save your retirement, save your business, right? You want to exit your business at some point in time. You want to sell it. You want to make money. It's my job to make sure it's still there, right? Whether it's compliance, whether it's a breach, whether it's just making sure that you stay operating so you have customers. It's absolutely critical to think of it from that mindset. And how can I protect the business? And not necessarily care about the IT, right? You have that conflict exists. Be like, hey, listen, we can't have everybody logging in with the same account with the same password, and it can't be password 123 for obvious reasons. But I still get those requests. We onboarded a customer that we're working through. They have machines that are still running XP on 32-bit only processors, right? And it's just like, hey, I can't even install like the tools I need to protect you on this infrastructure. You have to upgrade these things. Oh, by the way, they're not HIPAA compliant. So when we talk about IT and we talk about cybersecurity, what do you, and you're at the edge of the latest threats. You get to see, like you said, people are submitting, hey, here's this late, approve this malware. Let me run this. What do you think the threat landscape is going to look like or change to going forward?
I think first of all, as the world has become more and more focused on the endpoint. The endpoint is the only place where all your data is unencrypted. Normally, even at rest now on the servers, they're encrypted. They've got some kind of protection on them. The endpoint is the easiest way to get data, because for two reasons. One is you can manipulate people, and people are always the risk for security. Whether it's a spear phishing campaign, whether it's a phishing campaign, whether it's a piece of malware, people are manipulative. So I think the future of threats revolves around, well, what has happened, more and more targeted towards the endpoint as a way of moving around. Of course, we're going to see people getting into Office 365, but ultimately, I saw a lot of threats where people will log into an Office 365 account and they'll switch files out to executables with an Excel icon in the OneDrive, and then somebody will run that, and now they've got access to the endpoint. So I think, first of all, it's going to keep getting worse. I mean, we saw McDonald's today. We've seen Colonial Pipeline. We saw JBS Meats. Have I got that right? We've seen all of these attacks. And by the way, these are the ones that make the news. I can tell two major ransomware attacks that we foiled last Monday at the same weekend that JBS happened. And we're talking about complete company shutdowns where someone deployed something from their centralized deployment software and it would have been the end of the world. It's getting worse. It's getting more frequent. And the reality is the demands are getting higher. And if you think about it, as a small business, we don't see small businesses on the news. We see them every single day being targeted. These guys know you can still pay the money. And they know it's a lot easier to get into you than it is into a big organization. So I think we'll continue to see an increase in that. We've seen cybercrime go up like this for the last 10 years. We're going to see it continue to go up like this. And the only way we're going to see it slow down is if everyone goes out and they start protecting themselves better and they make the game harder, because it is a game. It's a rat race between you and the bad guys. And you got to make yourself the most secure. If you're a thief and you come into a neighborhood and there's two houses, one of them's got security cameras, big bolts on the door, a vicious looking dog, and a burglar alarm that's monitored by ADT, and the next door's house has got nothing, you're going to go into the next door's house, and of course you can still break into the other one. There's still, but it's going to be a lot harder. So you got to make yourself less hackable and less penetrable. And if you do that, you're going to stay ahead of the game. If you don't, you're going to lose. And I don't think I speak to MSPs every single day. I haven't spoken to an MSP that hasn't dealt with ransomware in some form in the last 2 years.
Absolutely. I get a call on ransomware probably once or twice a month. And it's always the same conversation. Hey, show me what ransomware it is. Okay, it's this one. All right, it's Devos, or it's this CryptoLocker, or it's this, whatever the flavor of the month is. Sometimes they're lucky because it's an old strain, and there's decryptors that are already out there. But more often than not, it's rather new. It's 2 or 3, maybe months old or weeks old. And it's just like, hey, restore from backup. And then I hear that, we had our backups plugged into the server, or it was on a USB, or they deleted them, or, but I never got those calls 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
Well, and it's all the time now. And here's the other thing. Every ransom case I've seen recently has followed with, we have uploaded all of your data. And if you look at the firewall logs, it absolutely matches it. Once that's gone, you can't get it back. Now, you can pay and they might not dump it on the web, but they will use it against you. I mean, you say if someone gets ransomware, they get 7 years bad luck, because their employees' data, they're going to have their identity theft. Your partners, your customers are going to get hit by ransomware, because they've, just like we talked about the QuickBooks database, they've now got all this information, so they can go after your partners, they can go after you again, they can go after your employees. You're going to have 7 years bad luck, and everyone that you know is as well. So it's not, and you can't undo that. You can't restore that from a backup. It's there. The damage is done.
Absolutely. And I try to highlight that to customers and say, hey, you need to have extra precautions in place. They're getting even savvier. I ran into one that, when they were communicating with the target, they just said, hey, upload a copy, like, show us a copy of your business insurance or your cyber insurance. Show us what you've got. And that's it. And we'll even refund your deductible. So you only got 100,000. We'll take 100,000. You got $1 million. We'll take $1 million. Like we'll work with you. This is a business transaction, right?
Yeah.
And that's how they view it.
Well, they also look at your bank. I mean, the first thing they do is see how much money you've got in your bank account. So when they call you up and say, oh, we've got, you say, oh, I can't afford to pay $500,000. So yeah, you can. You got 1.8 million in your bank account. They know that before they even ask for the demand. They're so precise about this. They know everything about you.
People don't get that when I have a $10 million, any other business owner, right? If you or I, both as business owners or people who are running our business, suddenly got $10 million injected into our business, we would put it back into the business and we would make our business better. We would either advertise or hire employees or get new tools or new skill sets added to our business. They're doing the same thing. Hey, somebody just paid us $5 million. Let me hire some more people, create some new scripts, investigate some new tools and new ways to bypass and to execute more ransomware. Like people aren't realizing that they're funding the future attacks.
Well, do you know what's even more terrifying about that? They're not just funding that. These aren't people building orphanages. They're not nice people. They're crime gangs. They're often linked to cartel. They're drugs, human trafficking, and you're not just funding further ransomware attacks, but you're funding further crime in other areas too. Human trafficking and all sorts of drug trafficking and things like that.
Yeah, it's very rarely are they just and the nation state players. I read one report that a significant amount of GDP for North Korea is purely ransomware.
Oh yeah.
Right? Huge players in the game, people that are funding blacklist projects in nation states or using nation state teams to build that money up.
Yeah, so that's what's terrifying about it. And we've seen a lot of we saw updated guidance last year issued by the US Treasury on that, on if you pay certain ransoms, you're potentially in breach of sanction laws and things like that. So you have to be super careful about that as well. Now, Biden did say he wasn't going to get involved with whether Colonial paid the ransom or not. But I think potentially you're getting into trouble with that.
We've got a few minutes left before I know you have to go. And I really appreciate your time. But before we started recording, you said to me that you were reading particular information from the new administration on how they're handling ransomware and these particular breaches that I should read if I need to go to sleep at night. But you said that there were some very interesting nuggets in that. Can you share some of those?
Yes. So essentially, I almost feel like when something's released by the federal government, if you haven't already done it, you're really stupid because they're normally a long way behind. And if the White House can figure something out, then you're in trouble. So there's an executive order that's incredibly long that talks about strategy to improve cybersecurity in the federal government, but also in any infrastructure that deals with or people who do business with the federal government. What's important about this, before I break down some of the things they put in there, is compliance is a minimum. And I have a great picture. Well, it's not a great picture, but it's a very effective picture that shows what compliance means. There's a guy on a motorcycle naked with a helmet on. And it says, this guy is compliant. He's wearing his helmet. If he comes off the bike, he's going to hurt like hell, but he's going to rip his skin up, but he's compliant. So when you think about compliance, this is the absolute minimum that you should be doing. It's not the target. It's the bottom line. So if there's a standard that says you should do application whitelisting, you should do antivirus, you should have dual factor authentication, which there's lots of standards that say that. These are the bottom line. You want to be well above this. This is the worst case scenario. This is, you should have a basic lock on your front door type scenario. The White House executive order pushed incredibly heavily on the concept of zero trust. And when I first started reading that, I kind of got a little bit mad because zero trust is often used as a marketing buzzword. And I would consider what we do as true zero trust. We deny by default. We're not starting with an open position. But it actually defined it incredibly well that that you use least privilege and only give access to programs, to data where required to perform the function. And I think the guts of that order was, there was some cloud stuff in there, but it was really about focusing on a zero trust architecture across the board for all of these companies. Now, do I think all the government agencies are going to do it? Probably not. But there's definitely an order there that directs that it should be done and should be done in a very short amount of time. As a small business, the federal government giving these mandates. If I'm based in Florida, despite my strong Michigan accent. But if you look at the UK, they've got the UK Cyber Essentials that mandates you implement things like application whitelisting, zero trust architecture. In Australia, they have a Essential 8, which lists 8 things you should do, of which one is application whitelisting, zero trust, and things like that. So if you're thinking that these guidances are coming out and you can get away without doing them, you're making a mistake. You'll go, and it's a mistake that can end your business. One weekend you can go home and come back, and we're not talking about, I got some pop-ups anymore that were inappropriate. I remember 2001, someone got malware in the company I was working in. She was crying because she got to see man's parts and on a screen. It's like that was the worst damage, and the company was concerned about liability. Now we're talking about real business ending stuff. So if you're not using this, if you're not, whether you like the White House or whether you like this or whether you like the UK government, it doesn't matter. These are standards that are coming out across the board, and you should be doing them.
Yeah, we've certainly had a completely different change from the, the love bug and I love you viruses and, people downloading something off LimeWire or Napster to now just end game events. There was a MSP that focused on dentistry in, I think it was Portland or Colorado, and they got breached and all of their customers got ransomware. And they just closed their doors the next day. They're just like, everybody's fired. We're all done. We know the HIPAA fine is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars. That's it. It's game over for us. And it was probably game over for a lot of dentists at that point in time too. How do you rebuild from that? It gets
You'll leave the
tough.
town if you're an MSP.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's
I pull my hair out at night. I'm just like, oh god,
yeah.
because that it's a game ender. Like, I'm gonna go be flipping burgers and dropping fries. If something like that happens, it's a game ender for any MSP or any IT company. So, Danny, I know you've got a meeting here coming up. I want to really appreciate your time. Is there any final words you got for anybody who's going to be watching this?
No, I think, make sure you've got a good MSP, a good partner to work with, good security partner, and make sure that you're taking security seriously across the board. And that's the most effective. That's how you're going to stop yourself being on a local news station, national news station, or more importantly, being out of business.
It's true. I tell people, hey, just make sure they're not on the front page of the news. That's your number one job.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Danny. And for those who are watching, again, that's ThreatLocker. Find a partner that's using ThreatLocker. If you need to, you can reach out to Titanium or contact ThreatLocker directly, and they'll refer you to a good business partner for you. Because if they're using ThreatLocker, they're probably a good business partner. Thanks a lot again, everyone. I hope you all have a great day. Thanks again, Danny, for your time.
Thank you, Richard.